Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dofus Church Talk Radio. I suggest you get comfortable, get yourself a cup of tea, a little snack, because we're going to talk about the Cra Revamp that Uncommon has been working on this whole time. Is it good? Is it terrible? Let's find out as we dive into this devlog. So Uncommon be dropping bombs right now. They're really gearing up to drop this update. So not too long ago, they announced that they're going to be revamping the Cra, the Any, and the Sakuya. So this is going to be the first of 3 devlogs that we are going to get. And when they mean revamp, they really mean revamp. Like they really modified the Cra. A big disclaimer, I've never played a Cra. The Cra class never interests me. I always see them running around all the time. But personally, they have never appealed to me. They are a very popular class just because they're kind of straightforward to use. And overall, they've always been a good class. They've always been good for beginners, good for endgame. People really love them. And I was really surprised to see how much they are changing them. But after really analyzing what they put out in terms of the changes they want to implement, it has definitely caught my attention. I'm not going to lie. It did make me go like, damn, this is kind of nice, really. This new Cra actually looks like a lot of fun. But let's go ahead and go over the post they put out and just really break down this new Cra for you guys. Alright, so it starts as detailed in this article. Initial tests for the class revamps are coming soon. Today we are giving you the first devlogs for these revamps with the Cra Revamp. Objectives of the revamp. The existing Cra class didn't seem satisfactory to us because of the lack of potential and diversity in its actions. Indeed, quite often, Cras were satisfied with just 1 or 2 damage spells among the available spells, interspersed with a few reinforcement spells when cooldown periods allowed as such. In our opinion, there wasn't enough potential for anticipation for the Cras to build a game in the medium and long term during a fight. I would agree. That's what made them so accessible, is that they're pretty straightforward, pretty much, and that's why people love them. Whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, that's debatable, but let's keep going. The objective of the Cra Revamp is therefore to offer it more strategic potential when the class is properly mastered. We also wanted to make choosing a Cra more relevant in high-level team compositions, whether in PvP or PvN combat. Our main lines of thought for the revamps were as follows. So they're not changing the Cra because of balance issues or because they're broken, or because they're just fine. They're actually changing them because they want to add, an element of strategy to them. And it makes sense. It is a strategy, tactical MMO after all. And just having classes with various levels of complexity to them, it's always a good thing. How can we offer Cras a strategic potential while keeping the simple way of playing for those who want it? By giving Cras spells whose effects are variable under certain conditions, target, or state, we can offer 2 ways of playing. Basic use of spells on opponents make it easy to play, while using the beacons reveals spells' full potential. So this is really cool because this reminds me of, I mentioned briefly that I have a background in fighting games, stuff like Street Fighter. So this reminds me of the approach of easy to use, hard to master type of thing. And say in something for like Street Fighter, right? You could do an easy combo, but the payoff won't be as great. Or you could do a more complicated combo with a little bit of risk involved and the payoff is just going to be so much greater. So those who really are going to get a hang of how these beacons work are going to get rewarded with more damage and more advantage in a fight for doing so. And for the most part, the Cra has always been a class where, it's a pretty low effort class in terms of its learning curve. And you get so much out of it as opposed to something with a rogue, right? The rogue definitely has a high learning curve and it's not very beginner friendly. So those who really take the time to learn the rogue are rewarded at the end with insane damage. So far I'm on board, guys. How can we encourage Cras to use a wider range of spells? By offering more synergy between spells, but also between elemental paths. Cras now have every reason to use the entire range of spells at their disposal to reveal their full potential. This is a cool point too. The more spells you can use, the more variety on builds there's going to be. and overall just make the class a lot more dynamic. How can we make cross direct actors in combat? By reducing the range of some of the cross key spells, while in exchange offering them better mobility and a greater ability to get out of disadvantageous situations, as well as better area control. So what this is pretty much saying is they want the Cra class to be a lot more active during a fight, not just standing behind and shooting off the arrows and pretty much just staying in one place. It continues, how can we differentiate the cross elemental path while maintaining the class's roleplay insofar as possible? That's worded a little bit weird, but by harnessing and trying to transpose the archer's various character traits, offensive, defensive support, prowler, that can be found in history and fiction, we chose to offer 3 archers aspects, varied actions that can meet different needs within a team of players or when going alone. This little tidbit sounds so cool. Like, I'm all about, characters and their character traits, their character archetypes. So what they're saying here is pretty much they look at what makes an archer, right? Beyond just the fact that it plays at long range. You have characters like the Green Arrow, Hawkeye, Robin Hood, Legolas, right? They're all archers, but they're all different. If you guys seen Lord of the Rings with Legolas, you guys know he's a very mobile character. He's just like jumping all over the place. But even something like in other RPGs, right? Like in Final Fantasy, you have your regular archer class, but you also have the hunter class, the sniper class, the assassin class. They are all bow users, but they play totally different. So this is totally cool in terms of like flavor, and I'm happy they brought this up. We have introduced a new mechanic for cross around which many spells effects are centered, the Tactical Beacon. The beacon is a static summon that a Cra can summon up to 3 times simultaneously, and with which the vast majority of their spells will let them interact. These beacons will trigger additional effects when targeted, but will also replicate the effects of some of the spells on the Cra's other beacons on the field. This way, the game vision and positioning become essential allies to anyone who wants to fully harness this class. Okay, so they are really drilling the fact that they want the Cra to be a class of map control. With these changes, Cras will benefit from 3 distinct elemental paths that represent many different ways of playing. Utility spells will also be added to the elemental path spells. The Fire path, offensive, based on raw damage and the ability to burn opponents. The Earth path, defensive, based on powerful attacks, but detrimental to the caster's mobility and support from allies. This path introduces a new state, the Guardian state, which will change the effect of Earth spells. And finally, the Air path, the Prowler's path. It's based on less powerful attacks, which will aim to exhaust the enemy with poison traps and spells to slow him down, while offering the Cra greater mobility. Through these 3 paths, we hope we'll give everyone their own way of playing and developing relevant strategies to overcome their opponents, all without upsetting the most casual players' habits. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. So, if you are a chance Cra right now, you are pretty much getting the short end of the stick. There is no chance path. They got rid of it. And that sucks for you guys who played chance cross or some sort of hybrid of a chance Cra. And it really came at the cost of really condensing the archetypes of the Cra pretty much. You got your offensive, defensive, and your mobile class. I think there's room for another archetype in there. We do have the Prowler's path, which is the Air path, but also another thing that's associated with hunters is having an animal companion. So something like a hunter path. A lot of the times these classes are associated with having like a hawk or an eagle, just in terms of having the elements represent an archetype. But because of the way how Dofus Touch handles the spells, we don't have the alternate spell system that PC Dofus has. It's really hard for a class in Dofus Touch to fully support all 4 elements. So I totally understand them, getting rid of a path. And it's really going to suck for those chance cross. From what I know, chance cross relied on draining your opponent. They were good at removing AP, MP, and range. But it looks like those attributes were transferred to the Air path, the Prowler path. But let's go ahead and take a look at the spells. So they first start off with the Fire Path. At level 3, you're going to get Armor Piercing Arrow. At level 17, you're going to get Abolition Arrow, and that's a new spell as well. Burning Arrow at level 42. Blinding Arrow at level 54, and that's a new spell as well. And Explosive Arrow at level 90. So the Fire Path is going to have 3 new spells and 2 old ones to play around with. The Earth Path is going to have Transfusion Arrow at level 1, and that's a new spell. Barricaded Arrow at level 21, and that's a new spell as well. Last Bastion at level 31, new spell. Plaguing Arrow at level 60, so that's not a new spell, but it was an agility spell, so now it's an earth spell. And finally, Punitive Arrow at level 100. So that's a total of 4 new spells and 1 old spell. For the Air Path, Retreat Arrow at level 1, Poison Arrow at level 9, which is not a new spell. It used to hit for neutral, so now it's going to hit for air. And Pursuit Arrow at level 26, so that's a new spell. Pitfall at level 48, that's a new spell. And finally, Bat's Eye at level 80. That's not a new spell, that used to be a chance spell, which now belongs to the Air Path. And the last section here is utility spells. Summoning of Beacon at level 1, and that's a new spell. Distance Shooting at level 6. Grapple Arrow at level 13, new spell. Lashing Arrow at level 36, which is not a new spell, but it used to belong to the Earth Path. Now I assume it just takes away MP without damage. You get the Recall Beacon, and that's going to be the special spell you get at the Doppel Temple. And finally, the Cra Doppel at level 200. So it looks like they're not getting rid of those. Ooh, guys, this is juicy, guys. Like this is definitely a breath of fresh air for the class. Like, yeah, if you play Cra, if Cra is your main class, like your world just got turned upside down. You know, and that's the thing about these MMOs and just massive multiplayer games. Like, your class is gonna change. Like, don't get too attached to it. Don't get too used to doing the same thing over and over again, because there's gonna be a point where it's gonna get flipped on its head, just like this. And I totally understand. You know, it could be frustrating, it could be scary, but also it's exciting. And again, I really feel for you guys who like invested in your chance gear and your chance craw. And really, where do you fit in this new revamp? Where your build is pretty much non-existent because they got cut. And I'm sure Ankama is aware of this, that there was going to be people, you know, on the short end of the stick with their chance craw. So at the bare minimum, I think they should at least be offering a class change potion for those people. Alright, but let's move on. This next section here is spells descriptions and acquisition levels. Good to know. The AP cost, range, or effects of some existing spells may have been changed. When a spell is replicated on the other beacons, it only concerns beacons controlled by the player, and it does not affect the beacons of the potential Cra allies or opponents. Beacons occupy a summon's position, and the maximum number of them on the field is therefore limited by both the spell, maximum of 3, and the number of summons of the player. Okay, yeah, so Cras now care about summons, or having plus summons in their set. So even those existing Cra builds, your intelligence build, your earth build, and your agility build, they are going to have to rethink their set too, because summons are going to be important. This beacon summon is going to be a vital part of the Cra now. So if you have something like the Eva Torin set with the Alistair set, should be good for the agility side of things. Okay, so in this next section, we're going to go through the spells individually. We first start off with Summoning of Beacon. Ooh. Summons a tactical beacon that can serve as a target or relay for cross spells. Only 3 beacons can be placed on the field at the same time. Okay, so like I mentioned, this is going to be your main thing right here, the summon. So this beacon thing is also available on PC, but it works totally different here. It does have its unique take on touch. On PC, the beacon is used more for support. So on PC, the beacon, the tactical beacon, is used to have a target. On PC, there are spells where if you're trying to target a cell that has nothing in it, you can't cast that spell. And this is very important for AoE attacks. So say if you're on PC, If you're trying to cast Explosive Arrow and there's nothing on that center cell that you're targeting, you can't cast it. So in that instance, you would put out a tactical beacon and you would target the beacon itself, and so you could get the splash damage on something that you can't actually hit directly. And this also gives you a target for the grapple arrow too. And finally, there is one spell that they use where you could bounce it off the beacon. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but from the spell description is you would target the beacon and that would somehow redirect it. So that's how it works on PC. Here, the beacon is kind of like a filter for your spells. Here, you want to target the beacon with your spells, and once that spell goes through it, it's going to modify it. There's definitely a big difference, and I want to emphasize that. At first glance, it may seem like they just took, the PC thing and just brought it over, but no, they put their own spin on it. And depending on the spell, it's going to act differently. So, let's move on to Retreat Arrow. Inflicts air damage and pushes the target. When the spell is cast on a beacon, it inflicts pushback damage on it. The beacon inflicts air damage in an area of effect. Okay, so quick example. You put out a beacon, right, next to a player. Then you want to hit him with the retreat arrow. Hit him with that 1-2 combo. Now, once that enemy bumps into the beacon is going to shoot off an agility AoE attack. So for people who just want to play it simple, they could just retreat arrow somebody, or go with a more tactical advanced option and have somebody get knocked into the beacon and get a little bit of damage as a payoff to having set something up to make this work. And again, this goes back to their philosophy behind this revamp, which is, making something where it's straightforward and simple, or more advanced if you need it. The next spell here is the Transfusion Arrow. Steals HP in the earth element from the targeted enemy. If the spell is cast on an ally, heals them by a percentage of their HP to the detriment of the caster's HP. If the Cra is in the guardian state, healing does not cost anything. Alright, so they still kind of keep a little bit of their sustain that they had before, just in the earth element. And they have a little bit of a sacker thing going on where, like, if you hit an ally with this arrow, you are going to heal them by taking some of your HP. Little weird, but so this guardian state thing, that's going to be a new thing, and it looks like it's something exclusive to the earth build. We'll get into that in a little bit. The next spell is the Armor Piercing Arrow. That sounds pretty cool. Inflicts fire damage and then inflicts extra fire damage if the target has more than half of its HP. Okay, so this looks like a pretty straightforward fire spell. There is the little dynamic where, once you wear your opponent down, you want to mix it up with another spell. Distant Shooting at level 6. Increase the range and chance of critical hits of allied targets present in the area of effect. Alright, so this looks similar to what we have already. Like they said, the AP might change, the cooldowns might change, but the effect is pretty much the same. Poisoned Arrow at level 9 inflicts air damage for multiple turns. Another pretty straightforward spell. It reminds me of the Surround Poison. We don't know any details, base damage, AP, line of sight, but it sounds similar. Grapple Arrow at level 13. Attracts the caster towards the targeted beacon. Okay, so this is the big one right here. So for those who are familiar with the Fire Knot, they have a spell where if you target one of your machines, you get attracted to it. So this is very similar to that. And this is in line with them wanting to make the cross a lot more mobile. And this is definitely a spell where no matter if you're int, strength, or agility, you're going to want to use the spell. And this is definitely going to give those characters who rely on lock, it's going to make them a lot less effective against you. Because they can have you locked, even if you can't push them, you could just slide away. Abolition Arrow at level 17 inflicts fire damage. If the spell's target dies during the turn, it burns adjacent allied entities and inflicts fire damage on them. When the spell is cast on one of the Cross's beacon, kills the beacon and refunds the cost of Abolition Arrow spell to the caster. The beacon inflicts fire damage and burns adjacent enemies when it dies. Okay, so this one's it's a little bit confusing. If the spell's target dies during the turn, it burns adjacent allied entities and inflicts fire damage on them. Okay, so from what I'm getting is you hit something with Abolition Arrow, and if it dies, it's gonna do splash damage on your allies? I'm not sure if I'm reading that right. But the second part makes more sense. It's kind of like the Osa's Whip, where they can whip their summon to get a refund on the AP. But in this instance, it's kind of like when the summon has Martyr already on it. So that's kind of cool. It kind of makes it dangerous for your enemies to be around your beacons. They keep bringing up this burn thing, so I don't know if that's going to be like a debuff of sorts. But in short, you're pretty much going to hit your beacon with this arrow and blow it up. Sounds pretty cool. Next spell is Barricaded Arrow at level 21. Inflicts earth damage and removes extra MP from enemies if the caster is in the guardian state. Alright, nothing too crazy with that one, but you do have to be in this guardian state, which we'll get to in a moment. Pursuit Arrow, level 26. Inflicts air damage and steals 1 MP from the target. If the target is under the effect of Pitfall, the AP from the Pursuit Arrow spell is refunded. When the spell targets one of the cross beacon, increases the cross MP by 3 and kills the beacon. Okay, so this one has a few things going for it. So first off, it's going to steal an MP that's going to keep you mobile. And this is going to work in conjunction with the spell Pitfall, which we'll get to in a moment. But it can turn into a free spell, so there might be a little bit of setup with this. And the beacon modifier is that, so if you hit a beacon with the Pursuit Arrow, it's going to destroy it and give you 3 MP. So it's staying true to what they want to do with the air build. They want to keep you mobile. And yeah, Pursuit Arrow is all about MP. Next spell, Last Bastion, level 31. On the next turn, the caster loses all of their MP and enters the Guardian state. Okay, so here's the Guardian state bit. For 1 turn. In this state, they gain a resistance and range bonus. They also cannot move or teleport. You know what this spell reminds me of? I don't know why. It reminds me of, if you guys ever played Super Mario 3, the one with the raccoon, when you have the Tanuki suit, you could turn into like a stone statue. I don't know why, but this is what this spell reminds me of. This spell also reminds me kind of like a tower defense thing. Like you literally become like a tower. You can't move, you can't be teleported, you can't be moved. Your resistances are going to go up and your range is going to go up. This is totally a defensive spell, but at the same time, it's going to give you kind of like a burst effect on your earth attacks. We saw that with Barricade Arrow. It's going to take an extra MP from enemies if you are in this Last Bastion Guardian state. Man, so far all these spells are so cool. I mean, for somebody who doesn't know very much of the Cra class, like I'm super stoked and excited. So next up is Slashing Arrow, level 36. Shoots an arrow that applies erosion to the target and increases the power of allies adjacent to the caster. If the spell is cast on a beacon, applies an erosion penalty on enemies and the power bonus on allies adjacent to the beacon. The effect is also replicated on the cross other beacons on the field. Whoa, okay, so this is way different than the Lashing Arrow we have now. The erosion and the increase of power, this comes across as a totally offensive spell. Like this is something you will probably use when you're ready to like just rush in. And have your beacon set up in a way that to where you can really extend this effect across the battlefield. Overall, another pretty cool spell. Next up is Burning Arrow at level 42. Inflicts fire damage and pushes the target's presence in the spell's area of effect and burns enemies. And again, they bring up this burn effect. So yeah, I think it's totally a new effect that you could put on stuff. What burn does, we don't know yet, but yeah, it's totally a thing that the fire path is doing. It's burning stuff. But overall, it seems that the Burning Arrow is very similar to what we have now, except for this burn effect thing. Next up, Pitfall at level 48. Places a trap on the ground. When triggered, remove lots of MP from the target and inflicts air damage. The Pitfall remains visible on the map for 1 turn before becoming invisible. Okay, so this is interesting, and it's kind of like a SRAM type of thing they have, which that makes lots of sense for, archers, rangers, hunters to have It's totally in line with what a hunter would do, you know, set up a booby trap with a net or a cage. So in terms of flavor, I'm totally down for the Cra having like these trap type of attacks. Okay, so you set this up, somebody steps on it and becomes, the idea is for them to become immobilized, and that does air damage to them. But the catch here is people are going to be able to see where the trap is when you first place it on the map. Then afterwards it becomes invisible. That's interesting. It's kind of a neat little take on the saran traps. So I guess the idea is like eventually people would forget about it, that it's even there. Okay, and we saw this spell has a little bit of synergy with Pursuit Arrow. So somebody triggers your trap, they lose MP, and then you want to hit them with Pursuit Arrow, which in this instance will just be free damage because Pursuit Arrow will be free to cast. So you have a nice little combo here going on with Pitfall and Pursuit Arrow. The next spell is Blinding Arrow, level 54. Inflicts fire damage in an area of effect and reduces the range of the enemy's hit. When the spell targets a beacon, the effect is also replicated on the cross other beacons on the field. Okay, so first off, this looks like it's going to replace Bat's Eye, the old Bat's Eye, where it reduces enemy's range by -6 in an area of effect, thus the name Blinding Arrow. So pretty straightforward, pretty much just Bat's Eye in intelligence form. Next up is Plaguing Arrow, level 60, inflicts earth damage that increases with each consecutive cast on the same target. If a new target is hit, the bonuses are removed. This effect can be stacked 3 times. If the Cra is in the Guardian state, this spell does not require line of sight. Alright, so we got another Guardian type of spell. Alright, so Plaguing Arrow, this is something you definitely want to use when you're going after a single target, or really want to emphasize that focus on taking down a target. Not much to say other than that. It gets a nice little effect when you're in the Guardian state. So pretty straightforward. This Bursting Arrow, level 70, pushes enemies and allied entities in the area of effect. When the spell targets a beacon, the effect is also replicated on the cross other beacons on the field. Okay, so this kind of more or less works the same as what we have now, with the bonus that you can extend it with your beacons. Okay, and then at level 80, here is Bat's Eye. Inflicts air damage and detects invisible items in the area of effect. When the spell targets a beacon, the effect is also replicated on the cross other beacons on the field. Okay, so yeah, they removed the minus range effect of Bat's Eye and they gave it to Blinding Arrow and pretty much turned the spell from a chance spell to an air spell. Depending on how much damage it's going to do, might be a decent spell with the bonus that you're going to reveal cerams. Okay, just a few more guys. Explosive Arrow at level 90. Inflicts fire damage in an area of effect and increases the caster's power for each enemy in the area affected. Damage is increased on burnt enemies. The effect is also replicated on the cross other beacons on the field. Okay, so right off the bat, okay, so we found out what burn does. So pretty much burn means, so when a character is burned, it's going to sustain more damage from fire spells, which sounds super cool. So recently I made a video about builds and I was talking about the elements and how they don't really have anything cohesive about them. Like, yeah, you have fire builds, but it's not like they're using like literally like fire spells like flamethrowers or like fireballs and stuff like that. So the fact that they're kind of adding that flavor to fire builds, you know, fire builds, they're going to burn you. It's really neat. That's so cool. But the spell sounds pretty crazy. Like if you have a nice setup with the beacons, you're going to be bombarding the field with explosive arrows. Like as though they're going to be like meteors just falling onto like the playing field. And reading something like Explosive Arrow definitely put a smile on my face. Like that sounds pretty crazy, it sounds chaotic. And hopefully it's not too broken. But it sounds like a super fun spell to use. So my only question here would be, so if an enemy is burnt, it's under the burnt state, would other intelligence spells get that extra buff and damage? That would be interesting. Or just a Cra. Okay, 2 more spells. Punitive Arrow at level 100. Inflicts earth damage and increases the spell's damage every 3 turns. If the Cra is in the Guardian state, prevents the target from using movement spells or being moved. Okay, so this is it's a little similar to the Punitive Arrow that's in the game now. It sounds like it's overall just a very hard-hitting spell, and in the Guardian state, you're going to hit them so hard that they're not going to be able to move. You're going to keep them in one place. They're going to be rooted pretty much. It's like you just hit them so hard, you paralyze them, literally. and this really conveys like the earth, how intense this spell is. I love it. Okay, and now to the final spell, the Recall Beacon, which is a special class spell you get from the Doppel Temples. Targets a tactical beacon present on the field at the start of the next turn, makes the Cra and the targeted beacon switch places. The beacon will be destroyed at the end of turn. Okay, so this is something similar to what they have on PC, except on PC, the Recall Beacon, it's its own little thing. Here on touch, it looks like you're transforming a tactical beacon into a recall beacon. Okay, so I think the name could be a little confusing. Recall Beacon kind of makes it sound like it's like the Seller's Rewind, but it's a little different. Okay, so you're going to shoot out a beacon and cast Recall Beacon on it. On your next turn, you are going to swap places with it. So I think something like Position Beacon might be a better name for it. I mean, it depends on the specific on the spells, but what I'm picturing is it's the beginning of your turn, you use up your 6 MP, you shoot out a beacon, turn it into a recall beacon, and you can actually use that recall beacon to gain some distance with it. If you're casting this in front of you, if you're casting this behind you, yeah, I guess it would recall you back to that point. But effectively, this pretty much works like it does on PC. So that's a little bit of a rehash in there. Which is alright. They did a lot with the tactical beacon, so I'll give them a pass. I'm definitely a big proponent on keeping touch very different from PC. So yeah. Alright, and we're coming to a close. How stats are distributed will also change in the update. For strength, chance, intelligence, and agility, the point cost to increase a stat will be 1 up to 100, 2 up to 200, 3 up to 300, 4 up to 400, and then 5 after 400. Wisdom will keep its fixed cost at 3 and Vitality as fixed cost as 1. Okay, so I don't know if Cross had regular soft caps already, but they do now. Kind of sucks, chance is irrelevant, but it's nice that they have smooth caps. When the new Croc comes out, the new stats and spell points of players in the class will be reset. The class set will change accordingly. That is nice, but I also think they should give people class change potions. This is definitely a huge change, just not like a minor thing where they tweak a spell or something like that. No, this is huge. And it's definitely reasonable if people find themselves not liking the Cra anymore. So I definitely think class change potions are warranted here. Alright, and it finishes off by saying, we hope these changes will meet your expectations, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for a real in-game testing. In the meantime, feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section. And that wraps up their devlog. Alright, so what do I think? I think these changes are cool. They're awesome. It makes me want to play a Cra now. I know Cras have a little bit of a stigma for them being, a little bit of a brain dead class. And hopefully with these changes, that's going to change a little bit and make it more into a cunning tactical class. When I first saw this, I was definitely like, oh man, they really could have given the beacons from the PC side, but it turns out they are way different. And they really showed how different they are too. Like if they're approaching the revamps for the Any and the Sacker like this, like I'm stoked, I'm excited. And obviously we don't have the full picture. We don't know the AP cost for some of these spells, the base damage, the range, cooldowns, and stuff like that. So we will have to wait until we actually get our hands on this and really get to playtest these changes in the beta. If Cra was my favorite class and I was a Cra main, I would definitely be excited for these changes. Maybe not so much if I was a chance class. If I were a chance Cra, I'd probably be like busy trying to sell my set right now. But I think they are really set on creating 3 strong branches out of 4 elements. So the Osa was the last class that went through like a major overhaul, and even then they cut out 1 element, which was Earth. Like the Osa has no Earth spells, And I'm pretty sure we're going to see this more with other classes that do have 4 elemental paths. But in all, I think this is going to make the Cra a lot more interesting, a lot more dynamic, and more nuanced. And I really can't wait to see it in action. Alright folks, let's wrap this up. This has been a pretty chunky Dofus Touch Talk Radio. And I really hope you enjoyed the recap, my analysis, and my thoughts on the revamp of the class. As usual, hit the like button if you liked the episode. Leave a comment, especially if you're a Cra main. Let me hear your thoughts about it. And hit that sub button. Over the week, we actually hit 100 subscribers. So thank you so much for everybody out there supporting me, supporting the content, supporting the channel. I have been getting a lot of encouraging messages, a lot of messages just saying thank you, and I'm very, very thankful for you guys. For those interested, I will be doing a dedicated video for a channel update. I do want to do like a 100 sub special video, and recently I've been messing with actually streaming Dofus Touch on Twitch. So there's a lot of cool and exciting things happening behind the scenes. Alright folks, this has been Challenger EX with Dofus Touch Talk Radio. Take care of yourself.